I'd like to welcome you to our session on the USMCA with Mr. Patrick Wilson. I'm Paul Bergman. I'm the Director of the United States Export Assistance Center for the Department of Commerce for the states of Colorado and Wyoming. So this is kind of the federal government presentation today on the World Trade Center. So I'd like to introduce Suzette Nickel and Lana Lindberg from our office from the USIAC. Just stand up real quick. There's Lana, Suzette's here. There's Suzette. And also our other partners, the small business. Well, thank you for working with us. Also, our other partners, the Small Business Administration, Bryson Patterson, Dan, where did Dan go? Francis and Bob, they're here, they're over there. Okay, and Bob, so thank you very much. So that's your federal contingency. So we're very pleased to have Mr. W. Patrick Wilson today, Director of the Office of Business Liaison from the Secretary of Commerce Office. He is the first administration person to come to Colorado, to Denver, to speak on the USMCA. So it should be very timely. And when I first met him this morning, he was on a phone call from Washington getting the latest updates. So we should have very current information. Patrick comes with a background of graduating from GSIS, or Corbell School, and also the law school in '93 and '97 at the law school and working for a local firm. His full bio is in there, so I won't do that, but he has a Colorado connection, and that's why we're very pleased to have him come back, and please give him a warm Colorado welcome. Mr. Wilson.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. I have the unfortunate or difficult task, right, of talking about trade regulation after you've had a nice meal, which is always hard. So hopefully you all indulged and had some coffee at the end of lunch and you're ready. I appreciate the introduction, but more importantly, I would like to thank the whole World Trade team here in Denver for reaching out to our office, to inviting us to come and talk about this important topic. Perhaps before you got here, just by show of hands, how many people knew what USMCA was before this week? Okay, keep your hands up. This is going to be a trick. So the next question is, how many people were watching USMCA for a specific issue or segment related to your business? Okay, so a few of you. That tends to be the reaction I get. I've been out on the road on behalf of the Secretary doing a lot of these kinds of events to tell people about our trade successes, but it tends to be that people know it's happening. The worry about NAFTA going away was a really big issue. And I heard directly from leaders in business and trade associations and chambers of commerce all across the country about the worry about perhaps a unilateral withdrawal from NAFTA, which was a really big issue. And there was a lot of concern about that. And so I'm really excited that we did something really important, as we moved quickly in only 9 months to do a comprehensive renegotiation of our most important trade agreement with our two most important trading partners, Canada and Mexico, in only 9 months. And not only did we build an agreement that was far superior and updated from the previous version that we've been operating with duty-free and tariff-free treatment for almost all of our products in those markets now for more than 25 years, but we created a free trade agreement that will be the model for all free trade agreements going forward. And that is really important for you to understand, is that we are responding to a real change in the debate about trade. And I'm going to riff a bit. How many people were in the lunch talk today? Right, everybody came from lunch? So did I. And you may have heard me pipe in and ask a question about what percentage of those furniture products are made in the US, and that wasn't just a smartass remark, really. I was actually curious because I guessed that it was about right. And that's probably the product mix for a lot of large, big box retailers, is they have a good mix of products on the shelf that are from international sources and a good number that are from the United States. And that's a normal, healthy place for retailers to be. But one of the things I want to talk to you about at the front today is the theme of today's conference, which is keep calm and keep trading, right? We want to definitely do that, but there is kind of a lot of hysterical talk about trade, and there seems to be a lot of cliffs in our conversation, worry, concern, And I guess I want to unpack some of that for you here just in the 10 or 15 minutes that I have to give context to the negotiation over USMCA. But I'd also like to challenge you. So what you're going to hear from me is a little context for the trade conversation that we're having now, some specifics about Colorado and our impact of the USMCA, and then lastly about the challenge for you to get involved in this as a political debate as we try and seek the full implementation of USMCA. So first, a little bit of context about the trade debate we're having. I'm going to make this really personal, like every person, I guess. Every speaker wants to talk about what impacts them. But the most important thing I want to tell you is I have been working on free trade agreements my entire adult life. I left Denver and went off to DC to work for a member of Congress from my hometown from Kansas, right? Kansas is even more trade dependent than Colorado is, right? Beef and wheat and agriculture products and aviation, Boeing, paper products, electronics. Kansas is a trade-dependent state. And I started as a junior staffer working in Congress on trade policy and have been a free trader my whole life. And maybe after the luncheon talk today, or maybe something you've heard on TV, whatever tribal network that you listen to, you may have come to believe that there is a real crisis in the trade culture. And I'm here to say that that's not true. That we don't have a crisis, and you have all the evidence to prove that, right? The economy is doing great. People are finding buyers easier than ever before. Think about the level of crazy, of hysteria about the significance of trade and trade regulation and all the tariffs and everything that commerce is doing about trade. But contrast that with the amazing time that we live in, right? How many of you, just by show of hands, have been on Etsy or eBay or one of the other platforms to buy something today, or Amazon? Who has been on those platforms today? Bored during a speech, you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to order that. Click, one click, it's going to be in your inbox. You are doing global trade while you're at this conference, right? For yourself. You are managing your family's supply chain. Whether that's the paper towels you knew you were out of when you left the house this morning, add that to your Amazon, right? It's going to be there waiting for you when you get home. That's amazing. But flip it around for a second. By another show of hands, does anybody have a side hustle? Anybody have a side business where you're like, yeah, I'm a boring bureaucrat in the Department of Commerce by day, but I sell wine from estate sales online on the side. Why do people do that? Because they can, right? Because you can use technology to go and find the buyers anywhere in the world. And it's very funny you think about all of these resources here to help people go to market. But we live in the most incredible time for going to market that has ever existed in the history of the world, right? If you think about it, only 100 years ago, you had to take your product to like a town square and find a buyer and hope that buyer would show up and that they were in a good mood and that they would agree on a reasonable price that would allow you to support your family and maybe buy some seed corn for next year. That was the economic market 100 years ago, merely a blip in U.S. history. Today, I can take, this is my favorite example because Meg Whitman uses it all the time, a Beanie Baby in Denver, Colorado, right? And it's a rare one, a cool souvenir from, the Rockies or something, right? I can find the one unique buyer in the world who is looking to buy that exact product at the exact time. And I don't have to speculate about what the right price is, right? It's not a guess. I don't have to think about it. I can do an online auction and I can find all the buyers, maybe 4 of them who are looking for a Colorado Rockies Beanie Baby, and they'll all bid against each other. It's an amazing time to be trading, is all I'm saying, right? So all of that is happening, and that's all really exciting. But at the exact same time, we see this amazing access to markets where all of the impediments that kept buyers and sellers away from each other have fallen away to a great extent. At that exact time, we had a massive, I'll say it, a crisis of confidence in the institutions of trade. And this is where I'd like you all to just sort of sympathize with me for a second. I already admitted right from the beginning, I'm a trade nerd. I've been working on this my whole life. Many of you, same, right? If you've been involved in business, you care about trade, you're a gospel presenter about trade, you're trying to get people to do trade. Everyone's doing that. The problem is there's a huge segment of our society here in the United States who have not seen the benefits, have become incredibly skeptical, and they really distrust the trade nerds. And this is a challenge for all of us. Because just as you may have heard a bit in the luncheon talk, right, about concern about we're becoming protectionist or that there's a blowback, that's not something the president created. That's not something that politicians created. This is because for 28 years, until just about a year and a half ago, the average wage of a working class person in this country had been stagnant in real buying power for 28 years. If you did not have a college or an advanced degree, you were not benefiting to the same extent that lots of people like me, who was lucky, my dad was the first college-educated person in his family. He made it possible for me to go to college. And so in this information age, the information technology age, it's been a lot easier for people like me to benefit from the global economy. In fact, the statistics kept by the Department of Commerce, if you go online and look at our website, it lays it out in plain English over the last 2 decades that information workers, people who have advanced degrees and do technology, they have been benefiting from globalization and trade really strongly. And it was kind of trade weasels or trade nerds like myself who had to kind of go out and talk to ordinary people and say, take my word for it. America's better off with open markets and leading on trade, right? Isn't that kind of what we're always saying? Hey, I am an expert, take my word for it. Trade is good for Colorado. Trade is good for the United States. Look all that it's doing. The problem is with that analysis, we were missing the people who were left behind. And that has been a really big political problem because those of us who want and believe in liberalization of markets, who want to pry open barriers and make it easier still for sellers in the United States to find buyers around the world, there's a big crisis of confidence, and it really starts with us. And I'm including myself completely. As advocates for trade, we have a responsibility to go out and show people that everyone benefits. We have not been doing that. We have spent the better part of a decade seeing this disconnect, right, between the beneficiaries of free markets and free trade and the people who are left behind. And we literally just kept saying louder, like in some bad commercial, right? Take my word for it. We're all better off. And that message has just not been as successful. And to the president's great credit, he's not a trade expert, but I'll tell you, he really understood this disconnect, and he went to places like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, and made a really salient political argument. These guys who brought you the economic meltdown, they keep telling you to take our word for it, that trade is good for you, and that you're all going to benefit. And there were people who were not benefiting. And that created a political opportunity, and the president used it very well. So the last bit of context here is there is some really good news, and Karen alluded to it at the end of her talk today in this bit of pessimism, right? A little pointed finger in the chest. You, Patrick Wilson, you worked at a global company. You got all the benefits, and we, the people who make things, did not benefit. And the upside is what the president has done is very successfully got lots of people interested in trade. It's not just trade nerds like us who spend a day or take a whole day off work to go and talk and hear about trade, but ordinary folks have a voice now in trade, right? That's been your experience. It's a lot more people outside of this room, people who make things, people who don't make policy their daily business. They're keenly interested now in trade, and that's a tremendous opportunity for all of us, right? So the president has very successfully earned back some credibility for all of us to say, hey, it's not just Microsoft or IBM or ExxonMobil that we're worried about why it's good for trade. But trade benefits everybody if it's done right. So we got everybody's attention. They're all looking, and we've laid out an agenda of what we want to achieve. And the good news is we're not trying to fix the economy just on the backs of trade, right? Again, don't forget, better than 3% growth this quarter, an unprecedented level of economic growth for almost 120 months, right? This economic expansion continues. The most important thing, wage growth, the strongest growth we've seen in 40 years. Unemployment, the lowest in 50 years. Since before I was born, we have the lowest unemployment. So we're getting those other things right too. I think if we had a really bad economy and we were trying to use the tools of trade to try to win back some concessions from our trading partners, it would have been different. But the good news is we fixed a lot of the problem. Remember when we started, when the president was elected, we were tied with the worst corporate tax rate in the world. The worst in the world. Today, we're tied with the meaty middle of the OECD. So if you want to invest in Colorado, you can now compete on a level playing field with Shenzhen in China or Singapore or Malaysia or Germany or Mexico. But the one part we don't have fixed is the trade agreements. And Mexico's winning and Canada's winning on that. And we have to fix that, and that's why we picked our most important trading partner. I just thought I'd remind you guys, because we have some brand new statistics from the Department of Commerce, that in 2018, these are brand new numbers that just came out about 8 days ago, Colorado exported $8.3 billion in goods to the rest of the world. $8.3 billion. In that number, a good bit of that is agriculture, but high tech and pharmacology and other manufactured goods, aviation, avionics. It's a very diverse basket of goods that Colorado is selling all around the world. And the good news is we're not piddling with trade agreements that aren't so consequential, right? The USMCA trade agreement actually touches the two biggest markets for Colorado. Number one is Mexico, number two is Canada. Combined, that's a third of all the products that you sell. And all of the benefits that we currently get from our trade relationship under NAFTA are still there, but now we have the most powerful intellectual property protections. We have real country of origin that prevent people from making it somewhere else, shipping it to Mexico and coming in and getting the full benefit of our trade agreement with Mexico. With those real country of origin, you're going to see American manufacturers benefit, and they're going to benefit even as their partners in Mexico benefit, which is the way that it really should be. So I've got those bullets up here, and I really scared some of the folks here because I sent these 16 slides. These are kind of like the approved slides, and I'm going to put these up on our website here for the Colorado ITA website for you. But some of the things that have really been high priorities, I've got the 3 buckets here. Promoting the 21st century economy. You know, when NAFTA was written, we didn't have an internet. It was a huge update to have digital goods and services that are traded over the internet. But combating non-market practices. I will tell you, one of the things that didn't come up in our luncheon talk, but part of the reason why China and other countries enjoy a tremendous advantage in being a source for furniture goods, right, is that the factories that those products come from are subsidized heavily. I have been in 31 cities in China in the last decade, and they change every time I go there. I was just there last year. I was in November in Shanghai. But what they do have in China that we do not have here is if you want to go make an investment in China in one of those enterprise zones, they will give you a factory. The whole thing for free. They will give you free utilities and free water and train your workers. They had a grant program in a factory I went to in China because some of the workers had to come to America to learn about the products. They paid, because it was in southern China where I was, they had a grant program to give them winter clothes to come to Minnesota to learn about the product, right? They have industrial policies that we don't. And those are the kind of non-market problems that we're taking up in our negotiation with China, but they're enshrined in USMCA. And the whole purpose of that is to make this the example of having these kind of protections going forward in every free trade agreement we do from now on. And that's a really good thing, and that's why you've seen so much bipartisan support for USMCA. I'll just do a last note here too. I've talked about rules of origin and agriculture, which is a huge market. Nearly 40% of all of the exports to Colorado are agriculture products. We can thank our friends up in Greeley for that, right? The incredible businesses that they've built. Dairy is important here too. But I want to linger a bit about labor, right? So I didn't ask anything about Republicans or Democrats, and this is not a political speech. I'm a partisan, but what I really care about is making sure that people can go to market and find a buyer. And labor differentials between the US and Mexico market and not so much Canada, but that was a big determiner, right? Because US workers felt like they were getting cheated under the old NAFTA because there was such low standards for safety, wellness, hourly wage, and enforcement of standards in Mexico. And we took that on head on and won plaudits, not just from the trade union workers all across the US, but also our partners, right, who saw that we were really fighting for higher labor standards. And to their great credit, our friends in Mexico recently passed a substantial labor reform legislation package just about 20 days ago, which is a really big win for getting them on point to pass this. So got digital trade I mentioned, intellectual property, these are really big winners. Protection of trade secrets, many of your companies care about that. SMEs, obviously there's a whole chapter in SMEs, one of the most robust small and medium-sized businesses chapters in any trade agreement that we've ever argued, and it's a great win for small business. I talked about the labor side, but on the environmental side too, many great victories, particularly on chemical registry, to the great chemical standards we have in the United States to prevent pollution, water and air. Those standards can now be used in Mexico and enforced in Mexico eventually by law. That wasn't a condition for approval, but it was enshrining environmental standards that have really won plaudits from people that are not typical fans of a Republican free trade agreement. And it's been a great source of pride for us. So I've talked about the non-market economies and other barriers, and again, I'm going to share these slides with you. You're welcome to follow up with me too, because this is a good cheat sheet right from USTR. But the thing before I take your questions, I promised that I was going to give you a challenge, right? And I will tell you that we really need to get this USMCA agreement done this summer, right? It's an urgent political matter because uncertainty does affect the market. We have this looming uncertainty about our two biggest trading partners, and we need to prove that we can really do a bipartisan trade agreement. Because Obama couldn't do it and Bush couldn't do it, and it's not a political issue. It is something that affects everybody's pocketbook. So I'm hoping to combine what I said in the beginning, right, is where the president has engaged whole new audiences in the debate about trade, and he has real credibility that he's looking out for them. Does anybody doubt that the president really cares about auto workers in Michigan or machine tool factory workers in Pennsylvania? They know he cares about them. Right? And then it's us trade nerds, right, who have to be in the room and fight about, we care about our American businesses, and I can give those talking points and know the gospel, right, of free trade from the boardroom side. So we have a unique opportunity, if you will get engaged with us, to help remind people how important this market is for Colorado, to both Mexico and Canada, and how important it is we enshrine the victories we've achieved in this trilateral negotiation to really make a trade agreement that will become the standard for the next 50 years. So I would urge you to get involved, to learn about it, go online, read what I've talked, fact check what I've told you about this agreement, check with the people in your community about how they would be impacted by rules of origin and intellectual property and the other standards that I've mentioned. There's a lot to get behind here. And I feel your skepticism because it's been a kind of a pessimistic time for trade. But the good news is we really do have a unique opportunity to get some wins that wouldn't typically come because there is this kind of bipartisan agreement about how important trade is. I welcome your questions, hard ones and easy ones. I don't know how we're going to do that. Paul, you have one of the microphones, but I think other folks have microphones. But I really have dedicated a good amount of time here to making sure I can take your questions. You don't have to just ask questions about USMCA, but obviously I'm happy to answer any questions about commerce, about what we do, our role in trade, or how we can help your business. Thanks.
So I think we're going to actually do questions in the table out here because we only have a couple minutes till the next
Only
session.
how much?
Yeah, like 3 minutes left. So
Okay.
if you could go to the table out here, and then if any of you have questions for him,
Sure.
you can go ask him.
Well,
He'll
can I
be- he'll be
just
right
use
here.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
They didn't tell me I had only 20 minutes
Oh,
for
okay,
the
yeah.
whole thing. I thought that was
Yeah.
my portion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, no.
I'll just take 2 questions. How about that? Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So the question was about intellectual property and how can we be sure under the new NAFTA, under USMCA, how we'll get enforcement of those. And that's a really good question. And actually, I don't know if we can go back to the intellectual property slide, but there's actually a really good breakdown. So that's like a cheater. I didn't plant you to answer that question, but yeah, I think it's 1 or 2 back there, 1 more back. Okay, so you see it by industry, copyrights, but I can tell you, I worked in the semiconductor industry. It's the #1 patent industry in the entire world. Semiconductors are the chips that run the world. So they're thrilled about this because we'll have real mediation in intellectual property disputes, and we get to use US law because they already use our intellectual property system. So we basically enshrine the ability to let our rule of law trump. And more importantly, that we have real mediation that's binding, which is a huge, huge win. It's a lot easier to negotiate when you have such good friends like Mexico and Canada. They weren't thrilled about it, but we did get some pretty big wins. The best part about it is for other countries that are perhaps not so friendly and don't have the wonderful tradition of respect for intellectual property that our friends in Mexico and Canada have, we can really say, these are great, but it's really better, it's more about China and other places, right? Because we want to say, this is what a healthy, friendly relationship looks like, is these intellectual property rules. So, I mean, I think that's the real win. If you're going to go and talk to anybody who cares about IP, that's what you want to tell them is, you want this to be the standard everywhere. It's great because we won't have as many fights, frankly, with Canada and Mexico, just to being honest, we won't. But it's more important as the chit it is in the big global game about what a good, healthy intellectual property protection looks like. And one last question. Yes, sir.
Mr. Wilson, hi. Thank you for coming and speaking. I'm Stéphane Lessard. I'm Consul General of Canada.
Yeah.
Your friend to the north.
Yes.
Your friend. And my question is this, maybe a quick comment. We agree in Canada that NAFTA has been positive. We agree it needed to be updated and modernized. We agree we've done that. We have a good agreement. You call it USMCA, we call it different, but it's the same good modernized NAFTA 2.0.
Yeah.
But none of that agreement means a lot of beans unless it's ratified.
Yep.
Now, here's the link to the steel and aluminum tariffs of your administration. In the US Congress, even Republicans will say it's not going to happen, especially in the Senate, if the steel and aluminum tariffs are in place. And yet you mentioned, rightly, that it needs to be ratified pretty soon, this summer, in America, unless, if you want to avoid the 2020 political season and
Yep.
et cetera. Now in Canada, the window is actually the next 4 weeks.
Yep.
Because we have our own elections, and if those tariffs remain in place, our government will find it extremely challenging politically to put the agreement for our parliament to ratify it. So my question, perhaps a challenge as well, is why are these tariffs still in place on Canada, your best national security and all-around friend here in North America and the world? And the other part of that question is, why is China getting the vast majority of exemptions granted by your department for exemptions from these tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum? If you could explain that, that would be very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Merci beaucoup. challenge, I guess, of taking on that point is Canada's very ably represented. Your partners in the embassy in Canada work with our office every day. Almost every large American automotive manufacturer does business in Canada and the United States, and so we work very closely with them. But one of the things that I would say is we're well aware of this, and obviously our preference wouldn't have been to have a hostile Congress on our own side, right, to try to win support from this. But the good news is that the president has worked to develop credibility, because NAFTA, if you went to any union hall in America, right, and said the word NAFTA, what would the response be? Universal derision, right? They would boo me. Just if I said nothing else, if I stood on a stage like this and said the word NAFTA, workers would boo, right? But if I went to the Chamber of Commerce and I said NAFTA, what would be the response? Cheers, right? It's a great success story. It's that problem that your government and our government together are trying to solve, right? To prove that we have credibility with ordinary folks about how we make and formalize our trade relationships. And the steel and aluminum tariffs are just one example of a very crude tool and unintentional consequences that have affected our relationships, like the ones with our good friends in the Five Eyes. I'm an Army officer, so I work with Canada all the time. It's a great challenge, and in your basket of tools to try to fix our trade relationships, these national security tariffs are messy, and it's very difficult to sort out left from right. And as you pointed out, the American companies that are importing steel and aluminum products from China, that was the top request that we got, right? So we rejected a lot, a lot. We got 38,000 requests, I think, and we approved, I think, so far about 8,000 of them, and we have about 15,000 or so that are still left to adjudicate, and another 8,000 or so that were rejected. But it's not the business we want to be in, and we look at this as only a season, and I suspect that the continuation of the USMCA for Canada and for Mexico, those are going to be tied together. Not making a policy announcement, that's just, I suspect that they will be. The good news is our president really does have credibility on this issue to speak to the working people who've kind of been left out from a lot of the benefits of globalization. And hopefully when we do get to that point, maybe later this summer, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll have a lot of political credibility, right, to get a quick resolution. Because to solve this, right, the labor unions are very important to the Democratic Party. It's a really key constituency for them, and unless they say yes, we're probably not going to get it anyway, even if we didn't have steel and aluminum, right? But I'll tell you, I'd much rather have the steelworkers union on my side going into that fight than not. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but I'm sure my friends from Commerce will give me feedback on being a bad diplomat. But thank you all very much. Thanks for inviting me to come back to Denver. I'm thrilled to be here. And please do come find me in the coffee break. So
Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute break and then start the next session.